See you next week. So we've been looking at subjects that are fundamental in the world and the human situation, roots of creation. So let's try to think our way through one that is relevant to this time of year, Purim, Adar. We just entered the month of Adar, and that lends itself to understanding the issue of, Purim's a time of masks. Now we wear masks. So what is it that needs to be penetrated? What is the mask of the world? And at the heart of the human problem is really the problem of illusion. Right? Let's try to think through this. We try to talk about deep things as deep as we can in these sessions. This is a very deep subject, but also extremely practical. If you understand this subject thoroughly, this could radically change your own relationship with yourself, most important relationships in your life, the way you see the world. Because the thesis here is that our problems stem from inaccurate vision. That means we see the mask and we don't see through the mask. We see what the world presents instead of seeing what it is. We see bodies instead of souls. We see actions in relationship instead of what they mean. Right? And the problem is the world doesn't present itself to you honestly. What the world presents to you very often is not skin deep, is often not what reality is. So let's try to trace this theme. If you want a name, we call it Dimyon. Dimyon means imagination. Imagination is where the problem arises. So let's maybe take it back to the beginning. Try to understand that our problem is that we look at reality and we don't see it the way it is. How do we see it? We see it as a projection of what we want to see. Right? We see, Rabbi Dessler put it like this. He said that there was only one human being who ever saw completely clearly. Of course, Adam and Eve before the sin saw clearly. But after that, only one person got to that level of seeing completely clearly. Kabbalistically, that's called aspaklaria me'ira, a lens that is completely clear, lens or mirror that's completely clear. That was Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. He saw completely clearly. All the other prophets, no matter how high they were, they saw through a lens that is slightly cloudy. He was the only one who saw through a lens clearly, which means a lens, true. No human being sees the spiritual world directly. If you did, you wouldn't be here. You'd connect with it and you'd leave this world. There has to be a lens, but his lens was completely clear. Rabbi Dessler used to say, very beautiful insight, if you look through a clear lens, then you see through a clear pane of glass, you see what is. If you look through a pane of glass that is slightly cloudy, the more cloudy the lens is, the more you see a reflection of yourself. The dirtier the lens is, the more opaque, the more scratched and dirty it is, the more you see yourself. But because you lack insight and you think you're looking through the glass, the more clearly you think you're seeing reality. And the person whose lens is so cloudy, he only sees himself. He sees the whole world, but really all he's seeing is a projection of himself. Right? And of course the work, it goes without saying that the work is to polish the lens. And the cloudiness of the lens is the ego that gets in the way. So it leads you to see the world as a projection of yourself. And people can do that to a ridiculous degree. I mean, we start off like that. A baby, a child, sees the whole world as only extension of himself. A child's world is only himself. No one else means anything. His parents are only there to serve his needs. And unfortunately, many people never grow out of that. Right? Typically men, I hate to say it, but women have other issues. Lots of other issues. But men usually, most men are just inflamed bundles of ego, and they see the world as projections of themselves, and it can be ridiculous. It can be, it's like I'm right, and no matter what the evidence is, everyone else is wrong. It's from the sublime to the ridiculous. It's like the lady who phones her son. She says to him, "Oscar, are you on the M1?" He says, "Yes." She says, "I just heard on the radio that there's some crazy guy on the M1 going the wrong way on the M1. He says, Mom, there's hundreds of them." That's how you drive your mother crazy. But the world's a projection of you. It's, you've got your own reality. There's a South African version of that. In South Africa, there's a person who, is a little cognitively challenged. This individual. He has a name, but anyway, so one day he's driving with his friend, and they come to a red light, which in South Africa is called a robot. But anyway, it's a stoplight. And as they approach this red light, he accelerates and goes straight through. So his friend says to him, "What are you doing?" He says, "It's very dangerous." He says, "No, my brother always does it." They come to the next light, the red, accelerate straight through the red light. He says, "What are you doing? You're going to kill." "My brother always does it. It's okay." Third light, straight through the red light. "What's it?" "My brother does it." "No." Next light's green. Screeches to a halt in front of the green light. They says, "What are you doing now?" He says, "No, in case my brother's coming through." So, the question is, it was worth coming tonight, right? The question is, who defines reality? Whose rules? Whose rules? Whose world is it? And the problem is that, just to set the tone for Purim, the problem is that we see the world according to our rules. And maturity means that you see it as it is. Maturity means you see the world the way it is, not the way you want to see it. Talmudic training, by the way, is a training in seeing reality. The first exercise in learning Torah is to see the world the way it is. It's very interesting that the yeshiva world, people involved in Torah study, they spend almost all their time in Talmud. The yeshivas, they spend the whole day studying Talmud. Babylonian Talmud, Talmud Bavli. According to deep sources, the Babylonian Talmud is a process of dealing with unreality and illusion and extracting from it reality. You know that Talmud Bavli, the word Bavel in Hebrew, which is literally translated as Babylon, because the Talmud Bavli came from Iraq, Iran, the Babylonian Talmud. But the deep translation of Bavli means broken, confused language. The English word Babel comes from Bavel, right? Because the Babylonian Talmud is an exercise not of seeing reality, but only seeing unreality and seeing where it's unreal. Other Torah sources are not like that. When you learn Zohar, the Zohar is an insight into reality directly. The Jerusalem Talmud also. Interesting, when those sources want to show you and demonstrate something, they always use the phrase tachazi. Tachazi means come and see. Come and see, I'll show you. Babylonian Talmud doesn't say that. Babylonian Talmud says tashma, come and listen. Listening is always something you have to construct in the darkness. Hearing, seeing, you see the thing the way it is. In English you say seeing is believing. When you see it, that's reality. Hearing is always a personal construction. When you see a thing, it's all there. When you hear a thing, it's one syllable after another, and you still don't know what the person's saying. You have to listen to a whole sentence, and only at the end you then construct the whole sequence into... The Hebrew word shema does not literally mean listening. The Hebrew word shema means to construct, to assemble. Like it says, V'yishama Shaul et ha'am. Saul gathered the people together. Shama means to put together. A shama in Hebrew is somebody who evaluates. Right? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. When you say, Hear, O Israel. So people think, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel. Why does Hashem say, listen, hear? So this is important. This is what you're going to hear now is important, so I want you to listen. The rest of the Torah is not important. Shema Yisrael doesn't mean listen because this is important. Shema means I'm going to teach you about oneness. And oneness means assembling parts. I'm not urging you to listen. You should be listening to every word of Torah. But here I'm going to teach you to assemble parts into oneness, and you have to pull them together. The world is a broken down place. The Babylonian Talmud is an exercise of looking at broken pieces and assembling. All you have is a broken world. You don't have prophecy. You don't have clear insight anymore. All you have is broken pieces. When you have broken pieces, the only way you can assemble oneness is by putting the broken pieces together. You don't have the whole thing to work with anymore. When you were given the whole thing, when Adam was given the world perfect, his job was not to break it. And he broke it. But if you're dealing with a broken world, all you have is broken parts. Okay, so reconstruction is a crime scene. You know how the Talmud works? Babylonian Talmud presents a subject, convinces you beautifully of the truth of the subject, and then shows you why it's wrong. Fooled you. So now you get a more sophisticated version. That's called a Hava Amina, what you would have thought. Now you really understand it. Fooled you again. It's also wrong. It's a peeling away of layers. Talmudic training is a learning to peel away the layers of unreality. You can't grasp reality directly. We don't see it in this world. The world is hidden behind a mask. The word olam, meaning a world, means to hide. What could say it more elegantly than the word olam in Hebrew? The Hebrew word helem means a disappearance, a hiding. So the name we give the world, what could be a more potent clue? The name we give the world is something that is hiding itself. You know that the sages use the word mitziut. Mitziut, in English you call it existence, reality. They use the word mitziut. It's not a Torah word, by the way. It's a word of rabbinic origin. The Jewish people coined that word. Mitziut means a reality. But if you translate the word literally, it means something that came out. Matzah in Hebrew is from the root yatzah. Yatzah means it came out. What is mitziut? What has come out? So the deep sources say what you see is yatzah mi'elem legilui. What has come out from the hidden to the revealed. What you see is what the world reveals. Reality is what the world reveals of itself to you. It's not what it is, it's only what it shows you. And if you walk the spiritual path, the idea is to look through, and look into the person's face. You need to see what that face, the Hebrew word panim, which means a face, also means panim, the inside. Panim means a pan. Pan is a facet, an outside, a face. Right? And yet, panim is exactly the same word, means the inside. The deepest part of the face is the eye. Ayin means an eye, but the same Hebrew word means a wellspring, ma'ayan, where water that's not visible under the ground comes to the surface. That's why the face doesn't need garments, by the way. The face is the only place chance you have of looking at a person and seeing what they really are. The rest of the body is hopeless. You look at the rest of the body, you could easily mistake a person for an animal. But the face is unique. The face doesn't have shame. You don't need a garment for the face. Hands also, that's a different subject for another time. But the face doesn't have garments. There's no garment for the face. And the reason is because the face shows you the inside, if you look at it carefully. If you watch somebody die, right, which I've had to do on many occasions, unfortunately, you see that a moment before death and a moment after, there's a difference. There's a difference. It's subtle, but there's a difference. A light has been extinguished. That means you don't see that on the body. So the problem is, right? And therefore we study Gemara, we study Talmud. Talmud is an exercise. It's a training exercise, not in seeing the truth, because the truth doesn't apparent in the world. It's an exercise in seeing falsehood and understanding where it's false. And from breaking down what's false, what's left is the truth. So where did the problem begin? They found themselves in a world of reality. Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. They found themselves in a garden. In a garden. Do you think I could ask you for a favor? If you could just stop there's dance music going on there. Max, do you mind? Can I ask you? Yeah, I think it's over here. Just go and stomp on the machine. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. That's from the gym?
Yeah.
So go down there and stomp on the machine. No, I'm not fussy. So they found themselves in a garden of trees, right? What does that mean? They could have found themselves any place. God could have put them in an amusement park. I mean, there are a lot of things he could have done. Trees in Hebrew. Trees always mean. In Hebrew, the word is eitz. Eitz in Hebrew means something of essential intrinsic existence. The word etzem in Hebrew. The word etzem in Hebrew means reality, actuality. It means the bone of the thing. Etzem is a bone. Right? But etzem means actually. Etzem. Eitz is the root of that thing. They found themselves in a garden where all the scenery, all that surrounded them was aspects of reality. Which means they were in contact with reality. There was no mistaking it. They saw Hashem, they saw God clearly. And they were seeing clearly. They didn't need clothing because they were seeing clearly. When you looked at the outside of the body, you saw the inside of the soul. A body like that has no shame. And the challenge was only trees. You know that they were given 2 commandments. One set of commandments was to eat the fruit of all the trees. Mikol etz hagan, from all the fruit of all the trees in the garden you have to eat. The simple translation is you have permission to eat. But the deep translation is you're obliged to eat it. That means you absorb aspects and facets of reality into yourself, into your being from the world. And you lift it that way to the human level. It feeds you, and you lift the world. But it's an exercise of contacting reality. And there's one tree you must not eat, because that's the tree that will produce a mask and a hidden version of reality. That's called Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. What does that mean? Understand this. People think childishly. They think it means the tree of evil. Eat the fruit of the tree, and evil enters the world. But that's not what the Torah says. The Torah says it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. Da'at in Hebrew, das means intimate, marital intimacy in Hebrew is called das. It means meshing into one of two parties, two parts. So this is the tree of the meshing of good and bad. Eitz Hadas. So when you eat the fruit of this tree, good and bad become mixed, and you can no longer tell them apart. It's not the tree of evil. If there would be a tree of evil, it would smell so bad, no one would go near it. It's not the tree of evil. Nothing could be more offensive. It's the tree that confuses good and evil. And when man eats the fruit of that tree, he becomes confused. He doesn't become bad, he becomes confused. In Kabbalistic works, the tree is called Ilana Desfeka, the tree of doubt. What happens after he eats the fruit of the tree? He starts hiding under the trees from the God who sees through the trees. He knows who God is. One minute he's speaking to him face to face. The next moment he's become so confused that he's hiding under the trees, as if God can't see him. And what's God's response? There's a rule that is midah keneged midah. Midah keneged midah. He only operates the way you operate. The way you deal with him, the way he deals with you. It says you take one day, you walk away from me one day, I walk 2 days away from you. That's what Hashem says to us. Of course, what it means is, when you walk 1 day away from me, you're only one day's journey away from me. No, when you walk away from me, I walk 1 day's journey away from you. Now there's 2 days' journey between us. Hashem Silcha, Hashem is your shadow at your right hand. You dance, the shadow dances. Which means you determine how he functions in the world. So Hashem arrives in the garden, a man is hiding under the trees, God can't see me, and Hashem walks into the garden and says, Ayeka, where are you? God says, where are you? You want to play the game as if I can't see you? I only play by your rules. So man schleps himself out from under the trees and he says, here I am. And Hashem says to him, Hamin ha'etz, did you eat? I don't know. Did you? And by the way, at that moment Purim comes into being, because Hamin, did you eat, is Haman. And this is where the world starts to wear a mask. Right? And man causes that. So he has the opportunity to eat from trees, which means to absorb reality, and those were trees of eternity. You know, it's an amazing thing. It says that all things that grew then were trees. Do you know the Torah says, the Gemara says that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was a wheat tree. A wheat tree. Wheat was a tree. You know what that means? Amazing thing. How do we know this? Because it says that on Pesach there's a mitzvah to bring an omer of barley. You bring an offering of barley, that there should be a blessing on the crops of the field. Barley, a crop of the field. Sukkot, you bring water. You pour the water in the Beis HaMikdash in the temple, that the rains for the year should be blessed. You bring water, the water should be blessed. On Shavuot it says, bring 2 loaves of fine bread in front of me, so that the fruits of the tree should be blessed. Bread? Fruits of the tree? What's the connection? Barley, blessing for the crops of the field. Water, blessing for the rain. Perfectly sensible. Bring 2 fine loaves of bread in front of me, that I should bless the fruits of the tree? Somebody's got confused. Answer is this. That on Shavuot, when the Torah is given, the Torah is the Etz Chaim, the tree of life, that takes you back to the original tree. What was the original tree? The original tree was wheat, and it wasn't wheat, it was a tree. What's the difference between wheat that grows in the field and trees? And here's the secret, amazing thing. Trees are, if you understood what trees are, you understand the whole world. But a tree has one unique feature. When you eat the fruit of the tree, it's delicious, it sustains you, and in the same place as you sustained and you enjoy are seeds of eternity. That's why the seeds are in the fruit. And the seeds remain, and it grows another tree that grows more fruit, and it's an endless, infinite process. When you hold a seed of an apple tree in your hand, you're holding a compressed version of eternity, of infinity. If you want to know where this world shows Ein Sof, endlessness, it's every fruit that has a seed in it. And what happens is, you eat the fruit, and the tree is still there, and it grows more fruit, and it keeps going. And not only that, for every fruit that you eat and you drop the seeds, you get more trees and more fruit and more trees and more fruit. And you eat as much as you want, and there's more and more. After the sin, the wheat tree becomes wheat of the field. And now you want to have it, you've got to cut it down. The difference between a tree and a crop like wheat is that the tree, you eat the fruit and the tree remains. With wheat, you want to have it, you destroy it. That's called in Talmudic language the lo machalya karna and the machalya karna. Lo machalya karna means, in simple English, it means you don't touch the capital, you use only the interest. Lo machalya karna. You live off the interest, the capital's always there. Machalya karna means you want to live, you have to use the capital. You use it, you don't have it anymore. And that's what man brought to the world. Trees originally, all that grew, and the ultimate tree was wheat, was the tree of wisdom. And you ate the fruit of the tree, and you had wisdom, and the tree was there. But after you brought death to the world, death means it dies now. The tree doesn't remain alive. When you want to eat the crop, you want to eat the fruit, you want to eat the wheat, you cut down the wheat and eat it. That sin brought into the world a process just as silly, like one of my great teachers, he once said, it's if a person's given an egg. It's an egg. What does a wise person do with an egg? Puts it on a chicken. It's got any sense. You take your egg, you put it on a chicken. The egg will become a chicken. The chicken will have lots of eggs. And those will give you lots of chickens. And if you're patient, you'll have as much eggs and chickens as you want. You fill the world with them. But a person who has no wisdom, he thinks, whoa, omelette. You want to watch a person do that? What you're watching is a person walking down the street, tearing chunks of his own flesh and eating himself. Is it delicious? That's how the world lives. That's the illusion that was brought to the world. So that's how it began. And of course, all hell breaks loose then. What happens? He eats the fruit of the tree. Now good and bad are mixed. So now you can't sort them out. And of course, the echo of that is now all food is mixed. Now when you eat food, food has two components. There's the part that's delicious and nutritious and your body absorbs it, and the other part is disgusting. Very humiliating. Why were we created that way? I don't mean to, offend you. But why were we created that way? The body contains excrement. Extremely offensive. Very problematic. Very problematic. Very undignified. Because there has to be a separation of what's good and what's offensive. When he ate the original fruit of the tree, it wasn't like that. The food was absorbed completely. When the Jewish people walked through the desert and they reached that level again, they ate the manna. They ate man. The manna was crystallized shechina. It was divine presence crystallized. There was complete absorption. There was no excretion then. So now there's the problem. And which side are you going to take? So the big enemy they faced in the desert was called Baal Peor. The Jewish people are going through the desert. They're going on the journey from Egypt to Israel. They're escalating in spiritual growth. They're eating food, which is what man's work in the world is to eat of the world and absorb it and elevate it, and it's perfect. And then they come across these people who worship excretion. That's the nemesis of the Jewish people, right? Moshe Rabbeinu is buried opposite Baal Peor. Peor means to expose yourself, to be exposed in a disgusting fashion. Right? And here the Jewish people are traveling through that sublime level of spirituality, having received the Torah, and the arch enemy nemesis spirituality is people who worship excretion. What is going on? The way they served their gods was they performed their physical needs and ablutions in front of the idol. The Gemara says there was one woman who served every idolatry in the world. And you can imagine what that is. You're talking about extreme behavior. When she came across this one, she thought it was so disgusting. This took the cake. It's completely disgusting. So to show her total disgust for it, instead of performing her bodily functions in front of it like they all did, she went and she did what she needed to do on its head. And all the priests of the idol walked over and they said, "Lady, we've never seen worship like that. Amazing." What is going on? Because what's happening is that the world is now a mixing. And when they're together, it looks delicious. When your body separates them, you see what's involved. By the way, the whole world is like it. The lower part of the body, where the food is an absorption of the nutritious and a rejection of the offensive. In the middle part of the body, it's an absorbing of something much more refined, the gases that you need to live on, the oxygen from the air, and an excretion of the gas that's bad. In here, in the spiritual world, in the head, there's an absorption of kedusha, of spirituality, and a total exclusion of all that's false. Right? You're supposed to live in the world to make what's called havdalah. You have to see the world accurately, absorb what is kosher and what is spiritual and what is sanctified, and completely. Right? Because when they mix together, it's delicious. All the sensual pleasures of the world, all the sensual, the fallen and the illicit, they all have beauty. They all have beauty. In American pornography laws, it's called redeeming social value. That's what it's called. You're not allowed to produce anything pornographic, but if it's redeeming social value, so you know what they do? They put up a pornographic image and they put a line from Shakespeare underneath. So it's got redeeming social value. You have to make Havdalah. You have to see. Usually the line from Shakespeare is also problematic. That's another issue. But be that as it may. And that was the problem. So illusion came to the world. How did it begin? Because it says the woman, I apologize for this, but this is where it began. Often we can enjoy this sort of thing, so we might as well take the opportunity. That's what it says. It says, Vateri ha'isha, the woman saw, kitova etz lamachal. She saw that the tree was good to eat. She saw, yes, I know the sages blame the husband for having told her misinformation. Yeah, I know. But she was the one who saw that the tree was good to eat. Vateri ha'isha, kitova etz lamachal. The woman saw that the tree was good to eat. You cannot see that something is good to eat. If there's something you've never tasted before, and you look at it, you cannot tell that it's tasty. That's called illusion. That's where imagination entered the picture. She saw the fruit of the tree, and she was sure it was good to eat. The advertising industry, from the sublime to the really ridiculous. And there, they don't even give you something that makes the thing. They put something else there that's got nothing to do with this. They can't sell a potato. No. Without, this is a woman, it's got nothing to do with potatoes. So, the problem of illusion, facade, entered the world, and from then on, this has been the issue. And you see it at every level. The next consequence is that they're banished from the garden. They're expelled from the garden. So they're walking away from the garden, a tragic situation, with death in the world. And why did they go back? Go back. Can't go back. Because the gates to the garden are guarded by angels with flaming swords. Right? There's lahav acherva misapeches. The lahav, the blade of the sword that turns. Mitapech means to turn over. Hippuch, by the way, is Purim. You can already hear it. Vana'afeichu. You hear this. Purim is where things are reversed. There's a blade of a sword that is turning. Hold the question. What is the blade of the sword that is turning? There's a weapon that will kill you, and its blade turns and turns. The Rambam explains. It's the flashing sword of misperception. That means the reason you can't go back to the garden, the reason you cannot re-enter the garden, you can't go back to the place of clarity, is because your perception is so, sometimes you learn something that gives you tremendous insight. You so experience in your life that you see things clearly with amazing ecstatic clarity. You wake up the next morning, you can't believe you saw it that way yesterday. And the next day you see the opposite again, and before you know it, you realize there's nothing you can trust in your perception. It flashes, it looks this way, it looks that way. There's no possible access to clarity that's absolute, and therefore they can't go back into the garden. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. Now the Gemara puts it like this. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Chelik, the Gemara says that sin, the Gemara brings a verse that says, woe to you who are lured, attracted by spiders' threads of sin. Woe to you who are bound by the cables, the cart ropes of sin. So Gemara says, wait, one moment. Does sin bind you like spider's threads, or does it bind you like steel cables? Gemara says like this. The attraction to sin always begins like a mere spider's thread. Nothing. It's a flick of the hand. After you get involved in it and the addiction starts to build, then you're locked in. There's no way out of this. Because God doesn't play unfair. He wouldn't put you into a situation where you're bound with cables of steel and then says get out of it. That's ridiculous. He starts with just a spider's thread attachment. And you keep thickening that. Here's a 13-year-old boy. He's going to try his first cigarette. Sees the cigarette. What is the attraction? What is the craving for the cigarette? Zero. You can't feel a craving for something you never tasted. How could you possibly do it? But Aisha, she saw the fruit, and she thought, imagine, it tastes good. So there's a cigarette, and he's convinced it's going to be amazing. And what happens? Exactly that. He smokes his first cigarette, he's sick for a week. All shades of green. But somehow he managed to do it again. And sometime down the line, he's bound by cables of steel. Now the craving is irresistible. What began it? What was the spider thread that attracted him? Only illusion. It was only illusion. What attracted him to that first cigarette? It was he's going to be the Marlboro man. He's going to have women and horses, or horses and women. I don't know, whichever way, All of the above. Muscles and, It's a complete only fantasy. So when sin beckons initially, it's only a fantasy. There's no taste for it. And then it thickens up and it becomes irresistible. But it began with a fantasy. The Gemara says that when a person who's ill dies, so it says like this, what's the description of a sick person dying? The Gemara says that he sees above his bed the angel of death, the Malach HaMavis, and he's all eyes. It's Malay Anaim, he's all eyes. And he has in his hand a drawn sword, on the tip of which is a drop of poison. And this apparition appears to the person and he gasps, and as he gasps, he flicks the drop of poison into his mouth. And that's how a person dies. There's a lot to think about here. Why does he need a sword if it's poison? Why do you need a sword for poison? If you're going to poison him, poison him. If you're going to cut his head off, cut his head off. There's a lot to think about. But what does it mean that he's all eyes? The meaning is that when a person is about to die and he suddenly sees that his death is nothing more than the eyes, you don't need 100 eyes to see reality. Every pair of eyes is another vision, false vision of reality that brought death to the world. And that's what has to die now. The reason the person is dying, because he lived in a world of illusion. Illusion means things that appear to be alive, but they aren't. And death is a correction. It's a resetting of the system, back to what reality is. That's called Gehenna, by the way. I have to talk about this. Gehenna means the dimension of pain, or the dimension of ecstasy in the next world, and it's only an exposure to the self. Like the Gemara says, in that world, from one perspective, you exist completely alone. Not judged against other people, completely alone. Stripped of all illusion and facade. And all you see is what you genuinely are. You see what you are and what you could have been. How much of the self has been constructed is an ecstasy. How much of the self could have been and is not is a tremendous pain. And therefore, the point of inflection, the point of conversion, of inversion, of anafrich, is a sudden realization that all these aspects of my life, hundreds and hundreds of aspects, are things that I gave life to, but they aren't real. That's what has to die. Death came to the world because man brought illusion into being. And illusion has to disappear. That's called dying. Dying is leaving the illusory world and moving into the world of reality. It's a very interesting thing. The Rambam says, there's a famous argument. There's a famous discussion. The Rambam classically, Maimonides, Rambam, classically says that all magic and astrological powers and things called shadim, which are the dark side forces, which are semi-human and very evil, very dangerous, and all kshafim, kishuf means like sorcery. Rambam says it's all nonsense. All complete nonsense. For weak-minded people, he says, and for children, it's complete nonsense. Sorcery and magical powers and these half twilight zone creatures whose feet you can see sometimes, but sometimes not, half human, half spiritual. All complete nonsense for feeble-minded individuals. That's what he says. The problem is, as all the commentaries say, the Gaon of Vilna accuses him in an extreme fashion. How can the Rambam say it's all nonsense? The Torah is full of it. The Torah is absolutely full of these things. Hardly a page of the Talmud doesn't include. Never mind the Talmud. The Torah itself. The Torah itself. Pharaoh, Paro, he says to the Jewish people, you better not move into the desert because I can see in the stars that there's evil awaiting you. And he was right. He just misinterpreted. And what about Avram Avinu, Abraham himself? Hashem says to him, you're going to have a child. He says, Hashem, the stars say otherwise. First of all, who you're arguing with. But he says, the stars say otherwise. He's reading the stars. The Torah is full of it, astrological things. The Gemara says Rabbi Akiva's daughter was told she was going to die on her wedding day by an astrologer, and in the end it was deflected. It was full of it. The Gemara Kiddushin says that in Abaye's Beis Medrash once, a shade was doing damage to an extremely dangerous spiritual being. And extremely, extremely dangerous. Nowadays we don't have them. Nowadays they're not only not illusory, today we just don't have them. The reason we don't have them today is they're not necessary. We do all the damage that's needed by ourselves. So today we do the enemy, we're shooting ourselves to pieces. Today the enemy is taking a vacation in the Bahamas. That's where he is right now. He's resting up for the time when we might have some work to do. Today we put so much illusion into the world that he couldn't add anything. So this spiritual being was extremely dangerous. So the Rosh Hashiva said to the students, we have a great man visiting us, one of the great Amoraim is visiting us, and he's going to be in the shul, in the Beis Midrash. I want nobody to invite him home. Nobody invite him for a meal, no one take him home. And you will all leave, and he'll be left, he'll have no place to go, he'll have to sleep there. And this creature will attack him at night, and he'll defeat it. And sure enough, he left him alone, he had no place to go. That night this creature arrived with 7 heads, and he did battle with the creature. In fact, every time he bowed in Moedim, another head died. And after 7 times, the creature was killed. What does it mean? Deeply, of course, what it means is this was a serpent creature, and bowing is a bending of the spine in a humility, because the original problem that introduced this to the world was ego. So the humility, which is a conquest of ego, every one of those false heads that is raised in the world through ego, is destroyed by humility. The Gemara says anybody who fails to say Moedim, when you bow to Hashem and you don't bend your spine in Moedim, his spine becomes a serpent when he dies. What's the Gemara saying? The spine is a representation of the original serpent, which introduced to the world the temptation of illusion. He said, what do you mean you shouldn't eat the fruit of the tree? Think God doesn't want you to eat it? He did a very good advertising job. And they ate the fruit of the tree. Instead of seeing reality clearly, and therefore the consequence of not bending the spine in submission, in destruction of ego, is that the spine reflects the serpent power. So every time he did that, another one of the serpent heads, in the morning, of course, the thing was gone. And he said to them, were you endangered me? Well, you left me here alone with that creature. So he said to him, I knew you would. I knew you had no chance against you. The Talmud's full of this. So how can the Rambam say it's nonsense? He said countless examples. The Gemara says one of the great Tanoim, Reb Chanina, a woman approached him once who was a sorceress, and she tried to get some dust from under his feet. Because if she gets some of the sand that he was standing on, she could have killed him. She could have used these powers to kill him. As he saw what she was doing, he said, go right ahead. You cannot touch me. He said, because Ein Oid Milvado, there's nothing besides Hashem. All your sorcery type powers completely irrelevant. And if I do die, when you do your work, it's only because it was a decree on me anyway, it's got nothing to do with you. Because Ein Oid Milvado. The Gemara is full of all of this. So how can the Rambam just... And the answer is this. The answer is very clear. What the Rambam means is that if you live at a level of reality high enough, these things are irrelevant. When you live in a world of illusion, that you've created a world of falsehood and illusion, these things are desperately real, lethally dangerous. They're the things will have to kill you even in the end. They will be represented by the creature who is all eyes. But if you live at a high enough level, when you see reality objectively, they fall away. He didn't say to the woman, these things don't exist. He said, you can't touch me because Ein Od Milvado. That means when you operate at a level and you see there's only God, there's only Hashem, this is completely irrelevant. You have to live at that level. Somebody who's living in the world of illusion, this thing could certainly kill him. So, that's the meaning of Ein Od Milvado. And therefore, you know the shading, by the way, just as an aside. What are these creatures? What are these creatures? Where do they come from? So, I can't go into the details here of how they actually formed. It's not for mixed company. It's to look it up yourself. But they're creatures born of imagination. They're creatures born of imagination. They're real, but they form by imagination. The word Shin Dalet, by the way, that root in Hebrew, always means something imaginary. For example, when the manna fell, it says its taste was kalishad hashamin. What does it mean? It's tasted like... It means whatever you wanted to taste in it is what you tasted. You imagined any food, that's what you tasted. The Gemara says that when the baby nurses from the breast, so it tastes whatever it wants in the milk. And the word for a breast is shad, same root exactly. But you see time and again, right? These are creatures of the imagination, and of course they look like you. Which is the root of all of these creatures? So one says the king of these desperately evil creatures was called Ashmedai. And he lived in the time of King Solomon, and he looked exactly like him. So they're talking about King Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived, meaning the most firm grasp of reality. And his counterpart, what they call the doppelganger, is a being who looks just like him but represents the dark side. So one day King Solomon decided to do away with him. And he sent special agencies, not going into the whole story, he captured him, put a chain around his neck with Hashem's name on. Meaning, he put the stamp of reality on him. And he kept him in prison. And of course, when he captured the king of the shade, he's the king of reality, and he's captured the king of the dark side of illusion, and the world now exists on the plane of reality. And that's why King Solomon was the pre-messianic figure. Shlomo means the perfect one, the complete one. The one in whose reign you have shalom, and shalom, completeness. One day King Solomon said to this Ashmedai, said to him, how do you exactly operate? So he said, take this off, I'll show you. And that's where he made his fatal error. He loosed the chain for a moment, and it says Ashmedai swallowed him. Or he threw him 400 parses, which means outside of Israel. And then he sat on the throne. He started running the country. He looked just like the king. Where was King Solomon? Wandering the streets like a beggar, look-alike of the king. Can you imagine the mockery? Knocking on doors, you know who I am? I'm King Solomon. Oh, yeah, we've got lots of people like you. And who's running the country is the dark side, looks exactly like him. And then, eventually, the men of the Sanhedrin, the wisest people, the eyes of the nation, they got wind that something wasn't right. So they wanted to know if he was genuine. So who do you ask when you have a problem like that? The wives. So they called in his wives, and they said, does he behave strangely? And they said, yes, he calls us when we're forbidden. And not only that, he calls Bathsheba for marital purposes. That was his own mother. Then they realized he's drawing his power from the dark side. And that's how he was exposed, right? That's how they knew. And of course he needed those illicit relationships, because that's exactly where he's drawing his power from. Anyway, be that as it may. So these are creatures of the imagination. I was once in a shiur, and my Rebbe was explaining this. So one of the fellows in the class, there was a group of Israeli students. One of the fellows said to him, "What do you mean they're creatures of the imagination? Are they real or aren't they?" They said, "No, they're very real, but they produce." What do you mean creatures of the imagination? Are they imaginary? He said, "No, they're real, but they're produced by the imagination." He said, "But could you see them?" He said, "Yes." He said, "But they're imaginary." He said, "Could you take a photograph?" He said, he just couldn't. He said, "But can you really see them?" So the rabbi said to him, "Yeah, look in the mirror." He wasn't being facetious. He meant they are the dark side of your own, the imaginary aspect of your own life. And that's the issue. And therefore the problem, Purim, is the exercise. You move into Purim, right? Where what needs to be exposed is in Purim, at Purim time, right? Purim means the luck of the draw. There's Hashem's hand operating the world, but you don't see that. Purim means the luck of the draw. Purim means a lottery. Right? Purim is a Megillah that reveals the whole story, but Hashem's name is not mentioned. He's hidden behind the mask. It talks about a miracle, but the miracle looks like coincidence. The king couldn't sleep, and exactly on that night, time of that. A series of coincidences. Purim is the opportunity to see Pesach, Shavuot, when the Torah is given, is an opportunity to see reality directly. Purim is an exercise, a teaching exercise, where you learn to see through the mask and not accept things at face value, but are much deeper. And that's the hilarity of Purim. It's wearing a mask to look like the opposite of what you are, because what's being asserted here, and that's why the exact design to destroy the Jewish people brings about their salvation. Haman builds a tree 50 amos high, and he puts a noose, and he puts his head in, just to check that it's ideal for Mordechai. And the Medrash says, as he put his head in, the angel Gabriel came down and said, "Suits you. He's going to get killed." And in this effort to destroy the Jewish people and stamp them out once and for all, and the Torah will come to an end, generates the greatest acceptance of the Torah in history, which is the acceptance of the oral law. And the oral law is exactly a tradition that teaches you how to see broken pieces and construct unity and reality from them. And that's the power of imagination. Imagination, to see the images. It should be used, of course, in service of reality. The images are only there to manipulate, so that reality is constructed. But it takes over. It takes over. You know, when you're using your intellect and your imagination, the intellect has to drive the imagination. And there's no question that all the power comes from the imagination. All the energy is in the imagination. When you sit back in a comfortable chair and close your eyes and relax, intellect doesn't work. Imagination goes crazy. And imagination has no intellect. An image comes up and that has an association, and you remember a smell, takes you back someplace, and before you know it, usually happens when you're trying to daven a good Shemona Esrei. But you say, this time you're going to mean every word. And before you know it, you're taking 3 steps back and you've been in Hong Kong, or who knows where you've been. And sometimes it's so embarrassing, you can't even remember. Sometimes you think you're going to solve a problem, you sit down to work it out. And 2 minutes later, you can't even remember what the problem was. Because you move from step 1 to step 2, the imagination throws up an image, suddenly that triggers a memory, and before you know it, you're miles away. And there's no logic, one associated with another one, completely logical. You can remember how it happened. It takes tremendous discipline to keep a hold on reality and let the images come up only as needed. Right? And most people make no attempt. No attempt. You're going to solve the problem, you move from step 1 to step 2, the images run away with you. People feed that. They spend their money to go into worlds of entertainment and illusion where you have a schooling in unreality. And therefore, what we study this evening is Adar is moving into the world of illusion. We're moving in the depth of winter into an exercise where we understand that the world is an opportunity for separation. The original clarified world is no more. Right? It's a world of death, which means the illusory aspect of the world has become real. It's now virtually impossible to tell apart what's real and what's not. And the first object of the exercise is to see objectivity. How do you see yourself objectively? First, you need brutally honest approach to yourself, and you need a teacher. Asay l'charav, one of the most important aspects of a teacher is to choose somebody who's more mature than you, who can see reality more objectively, who's not afraid to insult you. You want a teacher who's brutal. Brutal. If you go and study martial arts, and your teacher says you're doing fine, you're great, find another teacher. You want a teacher who breaks your jaw. It might save your life one day. Once this great rabbi was in a class. He's a very, very sharp. I've heard him say things I don't think I would have survived. One of the fellows in the class asked a question. He said to him, that question's not even stupid. 5 minutes later, the fellow asked another question. He said to him, that's already stupid. The fellow was Israeli, so it didn't bother him, but, You want somebody, who tells you the truth about yourself. And an exercise in seeing reality clearly. So, that's introduction to Adar, to Purim, to Torah study, to the attempt to go back to the garden, right? To reconstruct a real world from the broken parts. What are the questions?
I was wondering if the angels were still guarding the gates before Adam and Eve were exiled.
Were they necessary? Why were they necessary before?
Yeah, okay, so...
To keep them in? Yeah.
And you said that about you have to be on a high level so you're not controlled by the stars.
If you see beyond them, they're not relevant to you.
Right, but Abraham and Moshe
Yeah.
weren't at that level.
So you know what happened? Hashem said to him, you'll have a child. And he said the stars say otherwise. So it says, Hashem took him outside. The simple translation is he took him out of his tent to see the stars and he said, count them, your children will be like them. The Kabbalistic translation is he took him outside the stars. And he said, if you live in a supernatural fashion, then you'll get dealt with in a supernatural way and the stars will dance to your tune.
But even Moshe even he has to be taken.
Where? Moshe wasn't subject to it. When Pharaoh told him,
When
Pharaoh told Moshe that you'll be in danger in the desert, something to do with water, right? So that turned out to be true. There's no harm. The law is, the halakha is, if somebody tells you astrological prediction, somebody valid, we're not talking about the back page of the Sunday Tribune, we're talking about the valid astrologers. You're allowed to believe it, you're not allowed to seek it. If you seek astrological prediction about your future, the punishment is, you'll get the information and it will happen. Because you put yourself into it. But if someone approaches you, Rabbi Akiva was approached by an astrologer who told him that his daughter was going to die on her wedding day. Somebody who knew what he was talking about. And Rabbi Akiva was very concerned. Why was he concerned? Because he was living on a level of Enod Milvoda. He was untouchable, but he wasn't sure his daughter was. So this young girl, she got married. During the wedding meal, she took a hairpin from her hair and put it into the wall just to keep it. And it's transfixed a cobra was about to strike and kill her. Saved her life. So the sages gathered round and they started questioning. Turned out that during the meal, a poor person had entered the hall who didn't have a meal. And in the great celebration of Rabbi Akiva's daughter's wedding, no one noticed. But she did and gave him her meal. And saved her life. Because that's not natural. On the day you get married, you're entitled to think a little bit about yourself. But she saw somebody else's need. You live above the natural, you get dealt with above the natural. So the question is, what level of reality are you dealing with? If you live in the world of illusion, the creatures are real, they're very dangerous. But if you live in Enod Milvoda, you put yourself in a transcendental world, he dances to your tune. Then you get dealt with on that. Yeah.
From your experience, do you have any tips on living in an Enod Milvoda kind of reality?
Well, one obvious tip is to study Talmud. You put yourself into an exercise. I once had the experience of learning with a psychiatrist. Studied Talmud with a psychiatrist for the first time in his life. He came back 3 weeks later and told me he was able to make diagnoses that he'd never dreamed of before. Because what presents itself as a reality, now you're learning to think critically and to understand maybe it's deeper than that, maybe it's deeper than that. Right? So those are exercises. So one exercise is Talmudic study, which is a constant training in not accepting things at face value. A second exercise is to be aware of this. Instead of taking things at face value, right? When someone's telling you a story, what to see more deeply. A third tip is if you become sensitive, you have warning signals that your own personality, somebody's talking to you, there's a response inwardly that people weak emotionally damp and suppress because they don't want to hear those clues. But if you allow yourself to hear it, a whole different picture emerges. Next exercise you need is a Rebbe, a teacher. Somebody you run it by him, and even if you don't have time to, after the fact, go and ask him, did I do right? Even if you don't have time to ask him in the crisis. Go and analyze it afterwards. Did I do right? To show you where you were unobjective. It's a gradual process of learning to see reality objectively. It's a training, it's a discipline. Yes, any other question? So that's one of the first points of departure. Right? It is simply focusing on trying to see things as they actually are. Not the way your childish motivation would like to see them. And you have to see that too, by the way. You have to see your own vested interest and see it clearly. If you see the world this way, decisions become easy. You have a complicated decision whether you should get married or whom you should choose as a suitable victim or, whatever it is. So you make a chart. This option, the other option. And the Baalei Mussar say whenever you have to make a big life decision, there's only 2 steps that are necessary. Take out the negiyas and clarify that study. Take out the negiyas means extract the vested interest and ulterior motives and clarify the sides of the issue. Write a chart. To buy a new home. Move home. Stay where I am or move. Okay, stay put. Put down all the variables. All the pros and all the cons. This one is going to, transport's going to be cheaper and it's like this and it's close to a place that sells 32 flavors of ice cream. It's got to be there. All of that stuff. And then the opposite. And then give each one a score. Give it appropriate score. The negiyas means you're going to give this one 5 out of 10 and that one 6 out of 10. The ice cream you're going to give 30 out of 10. That's not objective. Take out the negiyas. Take out the vested interests. If you can't do it, ask someone else. That'll have your problem. If you clarify the issue and you give everything the correct score and you put it all down and it's been objectively judged, you'll make the correct decision. Just add up the score. People don't do that. People sort of eyeball the problem and they sort of think about it and they sort of think they're thinking objectively when actually the 32 flavors are like big and other stuff. That's not to make a decision that way. You wouldn't make a business decision that way. So how come you make a major life decision that way, whether it's marriage or whatever it is? How do you get objectivity? One, is take yourself out of the situation. How do you do that? Ask your Rebbe. If you can't do that, you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Freezing cold outside, and you're very tired. So this discussion begins. Well, get up and splash your face with cold water and drink a strong coffee and you'll be fine. The other voice says, let's not do anything rash, it says. You know what another hour's sleep will do for you? You know how tired you are? You know how cold it is out there? And the conversation begins. If you've got a normal type, illusory Yetzer Hara, that conversation lasts about a second and a half and you're straight back to sleep. If you've got a sophisticated Yetzer Hara, he keeps you in bed for an hour debating the point. So you don't get your sleep and you don't get up. Because what he really wants to do is kill you. It's to learn to see it objectively. How do you see it objectively? The Shulchan Aruch says the way you see it objectively is as you open your eyes, you leap out of bed. Before you've got time to think. And then you debate the point. It's hard enough even then, by the way, when you stand there shaking and sweating and, with no blood pressure and you're about to keel over. But at least you've got a chance. But when you're in his territory, you can't see it objectively. The first law in the code of Jewish law, get up in the morning. That's the law. The language is hitgaber ka'ari. Strengthen yourself like a lion to get up in the morning. That's the first law in the code of Jewish law. I need to be told to get out of bed? Yes. It means like the spring of a lion. You leap out of bed. That's the first thing. It doesn't say think first. It says leap first. And then you stand there and debate the point. Take yourself out of his clutches. Put yourself into the objective zone. Right? So it's a training in one technique you can use. Ask yourself what your Rebbe would say if he was there. Sometimes in my own life, I have an issue. I say to myself, what would my father say in this situation? It's instantly clear. Sometimes I don't like to hear it, but it's clear. Sometimes when I have to counsel somebody, they tell me a whole long, complicated problem, and I think about it, and I say, I think you should do X. They look at me blankly, they tell me the whole problem again. Just can't see it. I say, look, the solution is X. I say, I'm you and you me, okay? They say, yeah. You the counselor, right? Okay. Then I tell them exactly the same story. And they say, that problem, solution's X, isn't it obvious? Just take yourself out of the situation. Yeah? So these are some of the techniques of trying to see the world objectively. Okay.